John Zannis, Evan Lazar, free agency tampering window, which is one of the dumbest phrases in sports.
The legal tampering begins now. The actual tampering began at the combine last week. So this has all been going on. And I think the funniest part about this entire thing is now you'll see Schefter, Rappaport. They've had tweets in their drafts of guys that they've known are going to sign with the respective team since probably 3 or 4 days ago
Yeah.
at minimum. And now we'll get to hear all about it. And clearly, as quickly as some of these deals come out, it's obvious that this was discussed and figured out well before any of the legal tampering window opens. Why we don't just have this be the official beginning of free agency is beyond me.
Again, it is what it is, but that's where we're at with it. So again, we're gonna hang out here for a little bit. We have no clue if anything's going to happen yet that's going to impact the Patriots. So you do think J.C. Jackson is someone who's going to go off the board quickly. Right out of the gate, a couple things that happened. Joe Burrow gets some protection here. Alex Kappa, 4 years, $40 million, signing over there. Looking around here, I know there was another deal that kind of snuck in about 8 minutes prior, which I don't know, guys. Why don't you just wait a little bit? Let's make it look good, right?
Yeah.
As well. But the big domino here is J.C. Jackson. And so let's go through everything we know about this, Evan. Obviously, everybody, I'd say 99.9% of people who follow the Patriots thought the sensible thing to do was tag him, because then you own the property. I hate talking about his property. That's a real crappy way to put it. But then you own you own the rights to J.C. Jackson. There allows you to extend him or trade him. Okay, so it now becomes an asset. It's an asset that you hold, and they didn't, and because they don't, that's not what they do. They assign a dollar value and they say, take this, and if you don't like it, you can go find your own deal, and if you don't find something great, you can always come back to us. We'll be here. It's worked for them with some people. It absolutely has not worked with others. I don't think it's going to work here with JC Jackson.
No, JC Jackson's going to get a top of market deal. And that's the biggest problem, I think, for the Patriots going into this with JC is there is a very big gap to bridge here between the Patriots and JC Jackson. And such a big gap that I think they felt like franchise tagging him was more or less just kicking the can down the road one season. And okay, so we could potentially have a tag and trade scenario, which those things tend to not really come to fruition. I mean, there are a couple of examples that you can go off of. Frank Clark recently, for example, is one. D Ford is another. But for the most part, those tag and trades don't typically happen all that much. And then you also put into that you just don't think you're going to retain the player long term. So yeah, you could have him here for one more season at $17.3 million, but you're just going to be right back at the negotiating table, and you're just going to be as far apart in a year from now. So that's really the biggest thing that I would say is the reason why they didn't tag him, is because there's just no deal imminent from the Patriots side of things that they could actually reach a long-term agreement with JC Jackson.
Yeah, so that's obviously, and again, this is how they do business. We've talked about this a lot. I know you and Alex talk about it a ton. There is clear merit to the way Bill Belichick does business. And again, I don't want to conflate two things, which is some people will question whether or not, Belichick's talent evaluation has been up to snuff the last few years, both in terms of draft, some not so great drafts, and then people are going to look at last year's free agent class and see a few swings and misses. That's one story. Okay, you can have that opinion. The business, the way Bill Belichick does business, is in my mind frustrating, but above reproach. It is frustrating because it seems that it could be done differently. However, I don't think at any point in time you can look back at what the Patriots have done and played hardball with these guys and see too many mistakes. Of course, some will get made, but more often than not, you see how many players move on to other places, get those big money deals. They're paying that Patriots tax on, that's Patriots success tax to get these guys. They go there and they're okay. There's a few times where you've seen it happen and it was like, okay, they let They let a real guy go, like a Chandler Jones. I know Asante Samuel is a terrific comp for JC because he's a guy who was the best cornerback they had, and certainly in the upper, you know, top 15 or so overall corners in the NFL. But was he a number one guy who deserved top 3 money? No. So they didn't pay him. They suffered for it. What I'm worried about here, Evan, is, the value of positions. I think the Patriots recognized the importance of cornerback during that period of time between Asante and what followed. And then they went and they made sure they had one. And you had Talib, and then you had Revis, and then you had Malcolm Butler, and then you went and got Stephon Gilmore. And you've always had a guy you felt pretty good you could throw at anybody and they'd be at least competitive, if not snuff them out. And the defense has been predicated more on that than paying a ton of money for pass rushers and other sexy things. And they've built it that way, and they've built it through their coverage now. And this now seems like a major gaping hole. I don't know how you get past.
So my response to that would be that I do think that there is an opportunity here for Bill Belichick to once again zig
Pivot.
when everybody else is zagging.
Pivot again. Yep.
Pivot again. So as we saw at the bottom of the screen, I was told that J.C. Jackson's offer was $17 million per season from the Patriots. A 3-year, $51 million deal was the total offer that I was told from New England to J.C. And my guess is $17 million is right around what they paid Matthew Judon last year in free agency as their top get on the defensive side of the ball. And that's around where they feel comfortable maxing out on a contract for a player. So that deal is obviously not going to get it done from JC's perspective. And I reported last week that the sides were never close to an agreement going into free agency. And he's going to get, and I assume that we're going to find out here in the next hour or so, that it's going to be from the Los Angeles Chargers. But regardless of who it ends up being, he's 3 for 51. JC is probably going to get almost double that total value from the team that he ends up signing with. I think he's going to be close to $100 million on the open market from a total value perspective. So $17 million per season, 3 for 51 doesn't sound terrible on the surface, but when you look at it from the landscape of the league, it's not anywhere near the offer that JC Jackson is about to sign in free agency. So to go back to your question, I do think that there is a pivot that could potentially happen here where the Patriots and look, the top pass rushers in the league, those guys are still breaking the bank. Those, the really good elite edge rushers, interior linemen like Aaron Donald, those guys are still going to be at 20 million plus. But if you're going to have to pay a guy like JC Jackson $20+ million a year, but you can sign a guy like last offseason, Matthew Judon gets around that $16-17 million number. Well, now maybe there is a better value with loading up on pass rushers. Belichick used to think, kind of go about it the opposite way, which was that the corners and the safeties was where the value was. But now maybe in today's NFL, in this league, they're thinking that the pass rushers is where the value is. So I could see on the back end, the Patriots, I floated a name out there today, Darius Williams from the Rams, could go out. They have Jalen Mills already under contract and sign some of these guys like a Darius Williams potentially, who are solid, capable NFL starters. They're not shut down corners, but they're capable guys. And those guys will then go out there, play their roles, play the system, survive and advance on the back end. And the Patriots will get more playmakers in the front seven. That's the spin. That's the positive way that you could possibly look at this. I don't expect the Patriots to be in on the other top corners like Carlton Davis or Tre'Davious Ward from the Chiefs. I don't expect the Patriots to pay that kind of money, because if they were going to pay those types of dollar amounts, then they might as well just give it to JC at that point. So I think that we're talking about them going down a bracket, down a tier or two, and basically looking for just solid contributors in the secondary. Maybe you use a premium pick in April on a corner as well and go about it that way. And for a lot of Patriots fans, I understand. And for me, the biggest concern that you look at with this whole thing is, are we going back to 2011 where the secondary was not good enough and they had a lot of holes? They were playing guys back there that didn't really move the needle, or you really don't want back there. At one point, we have Julian Edelman playing nickel corner because of where things were. And like you said, John, at one point, Bill Belichick said, no, we're going to get Aqib
I
Talib.
want to know I can take half the field away.
Right.
If not, and then I'm gonna. It's easier to defend the other half when I don't have to worry about that over here. He always felt good about that, And even if it wasn't that number one lockdown, the guy who can cover everyone, there was always that plan. If your number one guy wasn't suited to cover the other team's number one, that'd be the one who would get the speedier guy with the over-the-top help, your Tyreek Hills or whatever, and then you would put your Gilmore or your whatever on the Watkins or the secondary guy or whatever you have and erase that guy. There was a plan. There's less of a plan. I do believe the pivot. I know you're talking about pivoting potentially to the front seven a little bit more. I do wonder whether they kind of take the wide receiver approach that the receiver revolution that began with Wes Welker when they first brought him, and apply that to the defensive backfield and say, we're going to get a bunch of slot type corner guys, smaller guys, Mills types guys, Jones types guys, because again, maybe if I can get three of those for the price of a JC Jackson, because there's not a premium on them, I have now positional versatility. I can do those and some other fast safeties who can cover tight ends and be able to cover more space and ground better than if I devote all of these resources to this one guy. I do think this very much has gone the way of outside receiver. And you've seen how the Patriots have clearly shied away from going into that market for that big money outside receiver, because it's just not a value proposition. The teams that do are rarely successful. When they are successful, it's when they draft them and they develop them and keep them themselves. So I feel like this is where they're going now with cornerback.
Yeah, so I think along those lines, and I've been hesitant to go the route. I know a lot of people have thrown out there that the Patriots can play a lot more zone coverage next year because they're not going to have that number one corner to go mano a mano against somebody. I think we could be headed towards that. And what I've always envisioned Bill Belichick's dream in the secondary to be, because Bill loves value. He doesn't want to pay anybody big money, and he loves to find the market inefficiencies and things like that. The one thing that I always envisioned for the Patriots is having a positionless secondary where basically 6 guys can play any spot in that secondary, and you can rotate it. You can line it up based off of matchups. And then post snap, you become very, very unpredictable because Jalen Mills can play safety. He can play nickel. He can play outside. Then you have, guys like Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips are these Swiss Army knife players. And maybe that's the way that they envision this moving forward. And I think if you look at the playoffs too, last year, not the Patriots necessarily, because we can just throw that game out and never talk about it again, but looking ahead to the KC Buffalo matchup, or even the KC Cincinnati matchup in the AFC Championship game, this strategy nowadays of dropping 7 or even drop 8 into coverage and flooding the field with coverage players in the back end. The Bengals made the Super Bowl with Eli Apple as essentially their best outside corner on that team, right? And they were able to do it against Patrick Mahomes, especially in the second half of that title game, by playing this drop 8 strategy. And I think that is something that the Patriots could look at. They've done it before in the past, and they've actually been ahead of the curve a little bit in this iteration of football with the drop 8. They did that against Patrick Mahomes in the COVID season a couple of years ago. That was the game plan. So I think that there is something to be said for the fact that if you're going to run this system where you've got a lot of interchangeable moving parts, and you have 8 guys in coverage or 7 guys in coverage, well, that's a lot of bodies to commit to the back end, and you don't necessarily need to have a shutdown Stephon Gilmore, JC Jackson level corner to be the number one guy if you're going to have 8 guys and multiple help defenders in coverage. If that's the plan, that's the best spin that I can put on it.
That's what I think the plan is. That's what I believe the plan is. It may be through just based on necessity rather than a philosophical shift. More likely it's a combination of both. The thing is, though, that could be the plan we just don't know if it will necessarily work. I understand it, and it seems like that's a direction that it's going. But yeah, again, it was always that security blanket, more so than the top. I know, that outside receiver is that thing that always feels like almost a bit of a luxury,
Right.
rather than a necessity. Cornerback, we have come to understand, having watched this team, that it does feel like a necessity here. There's nothing worse than those, if you've watched the Patriots for a long period of time, than those teams where you just knew they just didn't have that guy who could take people away, and you feel so helpless. What you have a lead, and the other team is going to march, down your throat, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. And you'll always feel better when you've got that thing back there. So, I don't. The other thing is, I just don't know that J.C. Jackson was that guy. I do think this is a buyer beware sort of scenario. He's the best they had, but I do think the next team that signs J.C. Jackson, puts him out on an island against top receivers and says go, might be like, oh, I don't know that he's that guy either. And
Yeah.
I don't want to disparage him. I think he's done a really good job, and he's a ball hawk and an opportunist, and he's done great. But I don't know that he's that guy.
Yeah, I think last year some of his trials against some of these guys too. I Not to bag on JC on the way out here or anything like that, but I remember that very first drive against the Los Angeles Chargers in that game. They put him one-on-one with Keenan Allen, and Keenan Allen torched him for a 40-plus yard gain on that opening drive for LA, the team that he's probably going to go to. And then you also look at the games against Stephon Diggs and the Buffalo Bills over the last couple of years haven't been great. And I think the Patriots do feel that way to a degree, that he is a good number one corner. I think this talk about him being a really good number two guy, I don't think that that's really fair. I think he's a legitimate number one corner in the National Football League, but is he Jalen Ramsey? Is he prime Stephon Gilmore? Is he worth 20, 21, $22 million a year? Absolutely not, at least in their eyes. So a big one here that just came down from Adam Schefter, which I think there are some Patriots rumblings with this, is that the Browns have released Jarvis Landry.
Yep.
Now, I think that Jarvis Landry 3 or 4 years ago, you could have talked me into this being a really good move. Now I'm not so sure that that's really where the Patriots are at, but Jarvis Landry being released by the Browns is something definitely worth monitoring. It's certainly someone that the Patriots have liked in the past, and Bill Belichick's had a lot of really good things to say about Jarvis Landry in Miami and Cleveland and all those types of places as well.
Yep, no doubt about it. So it feels like a Patriots type of signing.
Yeah.
So some people would be okay with it, I think, based off name recognition, but it also feels like, as you said, huh?
It's just not the same guy that he was.
It's not the same guy, and you're paying for past performance, and so we'll see. But as a scheme guy for the type of offense the Patriots want, prime Jarvis Landry, I think, would have been an absolute lock, and an excellent fit for this team. So again, if the price is right at the end of the day, when all the dust settles and there's a couple $1,000,000 to throw around, if Jarvis Landry's still sitting around there, you could talk me into. I mean, I'll ask you this outright: Jarvis Landry or Jacoby Myers? Go.
Jacoby Myers at this point.
No question.
Just price point.
So that's
Jarvis Landry, just on name recognition alone, is probably going to get over $10 million a year. So we have to remember that there is a lot of money that's about to come into the NFL from the new TV deals. Amazon just signed that big contract on Thursday Night Football, and there's a lot more money. The cap obviously had to recover from the COVID season a few years ago. We're sort of past that now. So this year, the cap didn't have a massive spike, but the league is expecting 2023, 2024. We could see in that 2-year span something like a $40 million cap spike come maybe over a couple of seasons. So it's not all at once, but there's going to be a massive one. So some of these guys that sign over the next 24, 48 hours, they're going to have deals that maybe take some sticker shock for some people, but once you start to push them down the road a couple of years, they're going to look like bargains based off of the top wide receivers in the game. When they hit unrestricted free agency, they're looking at $25 million a year without breaking a sweat. I mean, we just saw what Aaron Rodgers signed as the top quarterback dollar. That 45, $50 million figure for quarterbacks is, if you got an Aaron Rodgers MVP type of guy, that's what we're going to be talking about. So a guy like Jarvis Landry is getting $11 million on the open market.
That's bananas to me. But anyway, it really comes down to it's Landry or Myers. If you prefer Myers, then there's no reason to even think about or entertain Landry. Evan, I'll ask you this. And again, fine. It's only 20 minutes into the legal tampering period. I will ask you, are you surprised we don't have the JC Jackson news yet?
A little bit. I mean, I think the Chargers and the Dolphins are really the two teams that made the most sense. Miami absolutely loves Stephen Ross. He loves to make splashes in free agency. Whenever they have money and cap to spend down in Miami, they're always a player in free agency. My entire lifetime, really, right? I mean, you got like going all the way back to like Santonio Holmes and contracts like that they offered 10, 15 years ago. Miami's always a big player in free agency when they have cap space to maneuver with. The Chargers was a big one. They've wanted to go. They have a lot of cap space, and they want to go kind of on a huge spree here to compete, especially in that division. But also, I think they feel like they have this window, this prime window right now with Justin Herbert, where he's still cheap, and they want to try to maximize that as best as possible. So those are the two teams that everybody's kind of floated around there. I mean, we'll see if it ends up being a dark horse that comes to fruition. I kind of feel like Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels and the Raiders might be lurking there in the background just a little bit to get JC. I will say this about JC. I do think for his sake that some familiarity with the staff and with the front office personnel and with the defensive scheme could do him some good. I think that there are some rumblings from earlier on in his career. Mostly, he seemed to have cleaned it up now a little bit. That he does need his hand held at times a little bit and needs, a special kind of treatment, if you will. And I don't know if I think the relationship thing might be a factor for JC, that he knows where he's going, who he's playing for, and maybe has some friends on the team, on the roster. And I could definitely see the Raiders using that to their advantage to say, hey, come play with Josh, right? Josh well. You've been around him. He's going to bring in some other Patriots guys potentially, and try to get him to come there from that perspective. But ultimately, I do think it will be the Chargers, because they seem to be willing and open for business out there in LA to try to spend like crazy.
Yeah. I will say, just from scanning quickly Patriots Twitter, people are very intrigued by Jarvis Landry. Again, I know it's a name. And I know Evan doesn't love it. I don't particularly love it either, but it does again, what many people are saying, which I believe as well, is it does fit what the Patriots do. I just don't know if he is that guy, as you said, anymore. Again, we are now 25 minutes into the NFL legal tampering period. It is not as big a free-for-all as we had thought at this point in time. So again, just to reiterate what the Patriots did with JC Jackson, they kind of let him walk. That's interesting. All right, I got another thing I'll talk about in a second. Just to move on with this JC thing, and then we'll talk about a couple other things. They do what they do. They assign a value. They let him go explore the market. And sometimes it works out and they come back, and we've seen it happen. I would say McCourty, Hightower, that's happened with. There's several people who they checked it out, saw it, and then came back. You just mentioned the familiarity thing being important for JC Jackson. Again, you do wonder, one of the reasons maybe why, and again, this whole theory could get blown apart if he signs in the next 5 or 10 minutes, but if it does get past today, you do wonder whether he's shopping an offer to bring back to the Patriots with the hopes that they'll bring him back. And if that's the case, you really never know how that's going to go. So I am kind of curious to see if this does go past today, if that's what's happening. Do you think that that's possible? That
I mean, I think
deep down he'd rather be here, and if it's close, he will come back and talk about it?
Yeah, I think that that's possible. But, like I said, it's not close, right? I mean, right now they're not close. I threw out that 3 for 51 offer. I'll say it again. the Chargers are going to offer him double that in total value. They're going to offer him 4 or 5 years, $20+ million a year, and the Patriots are coming in at 17, 3 for 51 with it's from what I've been told, a pretty heavy guaranteed contract, right? I mean, we're talking about some real guaranteed money, but I just am telling you that it's just not going to happen, and that I think this bridge is one too far, and I just think that there's a chance that they're going to just get blown out of the water. But I don't think that this is over. But I put the percentage chance of J.C. Jackson coming back to the Patriots at something like 5% at this point.
Okay, that's not high. That's not
Yeah.
a good percentage. Other news of note, we'll throw it out there. Not that the Patriots were in on a player like this, but it's in the division. The Dolphins throwing a couple of bucks at Chase Edmonds, who is in a backup role there in Arizona, kind of a change of pace back. Capable guy. I don't know that it's going to change the dynamic too much in terms of, having to defend Miami. I don't think this is necessarily a prime weapon, but it's a nice player here that Miami adds for $6 million. The Patriots, again, we're assuming this is the James White, coming back sort of situation. So we'll see how they do there with their two power backs and White.
Yeah.
Are you feeling good about White this year?
He's healthy. It sounds like he wants to come back. I thought maybe the Patriots would at least make a call on Chase Edmonds because he does fit that
He
James
fits it
White
there. It's a
role.
luxury, but yes.
A lot of money though, right? 2 years. I mean, that's total value, but you're still thinking about probably $8-9 million guaranteed.
Yep.
I just don't think that that's something that's going to really be in the Patriots' purview this offseason. I'm more inclined to believe that they could take a day 3 flyer on a running back that has some pass catching value, that's done it in college maybe a little bit, or has that skill set, and go that direction with it instead. I think between James White and Brandon Bolden, that's probably where they're going to be at. I did float out last week. I had heard that they had kicked the tires on Jakeem Grant, maybe potentially Deontay Harris from New Orleans, depending on his RFA structure. And some of those gadget, versatile Swiss Army knife type weapons on offense that can run routes and do things out of the backfield. So maybe that's a direction that they kind of pivot to. I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being what they do, because we talked about earlier value and pivoting and all that kind of stuff. They might look at a guy like Jakeem Grant, who they can probably get for a year or two at less money than Chase Edmonds, and say, oh, we're going to turn this into a track meet out of the backfield. And no, he doesn't have the route running nuance and he doesn't have the complete game that Chase Edmonds does, but he has better juice, and we can do some more things with him in terms of scheme touches and jet sweeps and screens and things like that. And they go in that direction with it instead, because Isaiah McKenzie with Buffalo, he was always staying in Buffalo. That one never really got out to the masses too much. But guys like Grant, guys like Harris from New Orleans, even a guy like Ty Montgomery potentially, I think those are guys that
I like that.
On. Yeah,
Ty Montgomery is a guy I thought of as a potential Patriots sort of fit. A year or so ago, is just, the versatility to be able to kind of go out there, play in the slot, in addition to, playing in the backfield as he's been doing. This is something, Evan, you talked about last week, but catching a little bit of more buzz today. Couple of reports floating around about the Patriots' interest in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which again, you had reported on as someone you thought would be a target here. Couple of reports out there that they're talking right now, and this could be something, a domino that would fall if this were the Patriots' only free agent splash coming to wide receivers. Forget about draft. We all know. Look, there's a big puzzle here. This is just some pieces come here, others come later. So you don't know how it's going to work. And then there's always potential trades as well. But you would like to see them address it in free agency before the draft, so you're not super reliant on having to do it all in the draft, because I think people will get panicked coming back without getting any new names in here. Now, if this were the only thing that they did in free agency heading into the draft, we'd still want to see them draft somebody, but would you feel good about it?
I like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He's somebody that is fits the mold for what I've been told that they've been looking for. I knew that they reached out to him a little bit last week. Somebody that's got good size,
You
that
can't
has
reach out to people last week, Evan.
that has good size, that has ability to get up the field, win down the field on deep balls from Aaron Rodgers over the years. And I look at a guy like Valdez-Scantling, and in a lot of ways, I think in this offense, he might actually produce a little bit more than Nelson Aguilar did. Like, it's just one of those guys that kind of is in the right place at the right time, knows how to get up the field, knows what is asked of him, plays his role. And the one thing that I keep hearing about from the Patriots side of things is that they're kind of in this twofold market at wide receiver, at least in the veteran side of things, where they're looking at it and they're saying, we either want to hit a big splash like Allen Robinson, or we want to get more value on the contract at X than what we have with Nelson Aguilar. They understand internally that they are overpaying Nelson Aguilar, right? He is not worth the contract that they gave him last year. He's not worth his current cap hit. So a guy like Marquez Valdez-Scantling maybe comes in a little bit lower than Nelson Aguilar does, not the big needle mover, but certainly somebody that has better value. And I actually think when you look at Nelson Aguilar's box score, I think Marquez Valdez-Scantling could definitely match that in New England's offense.
I mean, that's depressing when you view it through that lens, but it's the reality of it. At the end of the day here, if you want to cut ties with Aguilar, that's 10 million dead cap, but 5 million savings. If you're going to go in and get a person like Scantling, at that point, you're better off probably just eating that cost and just saying, okay, that's it. The 5 million matters more to me than hanging on to him and my pride, because that might be what you have, here, if you're going to address it with a player like this. Let me ask you, a guy like Scantling has always been one of those tantalizing prospects, and playing in that offense over there in Green Bay, people have always expected big things. He's always one of those fantasy sleepers entering the year, and just never really produces on a consistent basis. It's a guy who's 6'4" and ran 4.37 coming out of college. So he seems to have all the right measurables, yet he's drafted in the 5th round and has never really kind of taken any sort of leap, not to stardom, but even to kind of consistent, weapon here. I feel like this is the type of guy you bring him in New England, no one would ever throw him the ball.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess when I always look at it is I always think that guys like Valdez-Scantling typically overperform expectations in New England, where guys like Nelson Aguilar end up being bad contracts. You know what I mean? Like, that's truly how it feels, is that they kind of just are always looking for these types of guys. Like, could Marquez Valdez-Scantling turn out to be a Chris Hogan like signing, where he's not a Pro Bowler, he's not a perennial 1,000-yard receiver, but he ends up being a really solid Patriot. And look, I would also throw out there, this is preliminary interest on the Patriots' point of view. They're calling around, as I reported last week, on a bunch of different wide receivers. It's not real. It's not serious yet on MVS, from what I'm told, but they're definitely poking, around that market. And I think somebody like MVS, I think the top of that market is probably somebody like DJ Chark, who would be the best case scenario here. I don't know. Unfortunately, I think this is what we're dealing with, guys. And I wish that I could sit here and say that the Patriots are going to go out and sign Allen Robinson or make this huge trade or whatever the case may be. But it just kind of feels like this secondary or third tier wide receiver market is more where they're going to be at right now in free agency, unless Allen Robinson's market doesn't come to fruition, right? Unless that really doesn't populate with a whole line of suitors like is expected to do.
Physical profile, again, Chark has similarly, he's bigger, 6'3", 6'4", also ran a fast 40. I can't remember the time, but in the 4.3 range coming out of LSU. Is another guy who, again, if you're looking at, do either of these guys play as fast as their 40 times let you know?
Well, Chark had a big season a few years ago
with
the
did.
Jaguars, right? Yeah. He was a Pro Bowler.
I like Chark a lot. I think that would be a phenomenal. If you're stacking those two, I would go Chark, but I think he's going to get a lot more interest as well.
Yes, he's going to get more money. He's had some injury issues over the last couple of years. I wouldn't necessarily say any of those guys are true burners, but I think that what they bring to the table that they're hoping maybe is a little bit more than what Nelson Aguilar does is size, right? And that ability. I think they looked at that play, and not to sum it up all in one play, but I think it is a kind of a microcosm of the Nelson Aguilar experience. That interception against Buffalo, Micah Hyde over the top on Nelson Aguilar in the division,
where he didn't fight for it, right?
Yeah. That pass, you can't have a receiver that's not willing to kind of go up and is sort of just waiting for it to fall in the breadbasket. And I think a big reason why Mac Jones had issues targeting Nelson Aguilar down the field is that they knew that it had to be this perfect throw, right? He had to make a throw absolutely on a dime. And that was a little bit more difficult to do in terms of any the other options, or maybe a little bit more open, or maybe a little bit more high percentage, and they went away from it. And I think early on in the season you saw it where Matt kept on trying to push it outside the numbers in Nelson Aguilar, and they were always just a little bit off on the connection. So I do think they're looking for a little bit more size. I mentioned value being important to them as well, but specifically the guys that I've heard them linked to over the last couple of weeks, really since the combine, isn't the Amari Coopers of the world, right? I said right away, I don't think the Patriots are interested in those types of players.
No, it's the tier 2, tier 3 guys,
size type of players, and those are the guys that I think that they really would like, and that's why Allen Robinson's sort of the dream scenario at the top there. I would then put DJ Chark in the next tier, and then probably somebody like Marquez Valdez-Scantling in that third tier of realistic, probably the most realistic one, but they want more height, they want more size. I think it's part of the reason too, to a degree, why they like a guy like Robbie Anderson more than Nelson Aguilar. Even though Robbie Anderson doesn't play to 6'3", he's listed at 6'3", and he certainly has some more size on the outside than somebody like a Nelson Aguilar. So I think that they're trying to get more size out there.
Yep. Okay. So still nothing nothing that has nothing's going to make Patriots fans fall over yet, okay? 38 minutes in, we did not expect the Patriots to come out guns blazing like they did last year for obvious reasons. They spent their money. But again, nothing major. Patriots have not taken a hit yet in what we assume is going to be the loss of JC Jackson. That hasn't happened. I would say if you're holding out hope on JC Jackson, Evan, as he said, put it at a 5% chance. That's Evan's take. However, the longer it goes, clearly that signifies the better the chance, because it's either a competition or he's got his offers and he's going to come back to New England and talk to them because this is where he wants to go. So you don't know where his head is at. If the money is double, as Evan had said, in terms of guarantee and what Jackson is going to get. Again, I'm going to ask you this, Evan. How much does draft pedigree matter? You look at a guy like Chark. The fact that he's a second-round receiver and obviously had success for 1 year is going to certainly push his price tag up higher than MVS, who was a fifth-round draft pick, because people had an idea of what they thought this person was. And sometimes it's hard to shake yourself of that. And so I think with the Patriots and having caught lightning in a bottle with so many undrafted free agents and this idea of a system, how much are people penalized like this, or like a Malcolm Butler, who come in, show success here, but they weren't drafted, and they wonder, 31 teams did not see something in this guy. It worked here, but am I about to get duped here? Am I about to buy a lemon? How much does that factor in before you hand over something massive? Again, you have a first-round draft pick hits the open market who was productive. That money just everyone's throwing it at him. There have to be some people who are looking at a guy like JC Jackson saying, like, I don't know, man. That non-drafted thing really, really scares me.
It's a really good point from a Patriots perspective, especially because taking last year out of it, because last year was an anomaly on so many levels for Bill Belichick. Looking at just the history of Bill in this case, he has typically shied away from guys like J.C. Jackson, who were either undrafted, or Asante Samuel, I believe, was a 4th-round pick when the Patriots drafted him.
He was.
And they're not looking at paying those guys. And I think in a lot of ways, the biggest reason why, and this is definitely something that people talk to me about, is that the Patriots typically look for guys that are of that upper echelon talent when it comes to free agency. And I think they look at guys like J.C. Jackson, Malcolm Butler, Asante Samuel, and they say, we have already made you as good as you possibly can be, right? We have maximized your physical abilities. If you had more physical tools, then you would have gotten drafted a lot higher. Now, JC had the off-field stuff. Malcolm Butler had some off-field stuff as well that caused them to truly go undrafted. But even if JC Jackson was clear of any wrongdoing and didn't have some of the legal issues that he had in college, I don't think that he would have been a 1st-round pick. He might have been early day 3 guy, 4th, 5th rounder, but he wasn't going in the 1st round regardless. So yeah, I do think that that's a factor, because the Patriots, and again, last year aside, because I think that that was its own thing, for the most part, they're trying to find guys that are going to get better as they age and get better as they go in that contract. Now, the one rebuttal to that I would say is, for the most part, if you have a 1st-round pick and he hits the open market and he is not retained by the team that drafted him, that's also saying a lot about the player, right? The fact that we had a 1st-round talent, we drafted him, we tried to develop him, but we're going to let him walk anyways. That usually tells you what his past team thinks of the player. But in the past, you got guys like Stephon Gilmore, I think, is the perfect example. They broke the bank for Stephon Gilmore, did what they wouldn't do for JC, what they wouldn't do for Malcolm Butler, what they wouldn't do for Asante Samuel, because Stephon Gilmore was the 10th overall pick, had an elite athletic profile, a fitted mold that they wanted to play in terms of man coverage, and all of the things sort of lined up perfectly for him to come to New England at the time. But I think that's.
I mean, Aguilar's another. He was a 1st-round pick, 20th overall. It's another guy
Right.
who they looked at and thought, like, this guy came in as an elite talent. What can we get out of that person and their physical profile?
Yeah, I think that that's sort of what. I think they do think about that a lot. Yes, I do think that they look at it and say,
The Patriots do. I wonder if other
yeah,
teams do. Before you open the bank up again, it's really I would, it is a risky proposition. I know the Patriots, as you said, Evan, they're very good second drafters. They are guys who do find those guys who washed out but had those physical tools that made them blue chip prospects and 1st-rounders, bring them in, put them in the right system. Whether or not that works now with this Patriots team, having lost with the brain drain and having lost so many high-level positional coaches, I do question the ability of the current Patriots staff to do that at the same level we've seen them do it in the past. But it's a separate conversation. This one mainly pertains to J.C. Jackson and whether or not that price tag is going to be lower because he was an undrafted guy. So that's I know you're saying you think he's going to get that. I know it's a back up the Brinks truck thing, as you're saying, and you think some team and the Chargers most likely are coming with a big bucket of money. But I wonder if there's any chance that it's less than we think.
No, I don't think so. I think that they're going to back it up for JC. Look, you have a young corner, 26 years old, that has the interception numbers that JC Jackson has the ability to shadow ones. Is he the best lockdown guy for number ones in the league? No, but he has that ability to go out there and do it. This is a $20 million a year player. And if it's not, then could the Patriots sneak back in and do the whole get us your best and final, and we'll give you our best and final and see if we can bridge that gap? I think that that's absolutely possible, but I just don't think that that's really where this is headed. I really do think that J.C. Jackson is going to have a huge market, has had a huge market, and will get something massive here not too long from now.
All right. We are still kind of kicking around here, and we're talking about stuff with the Patriots. The two areas everybody's focused in on are definitely receiver and cornerback, and that's where most of the conversation is. And so I know from a fan perspective, those are areas you want to see them address. But what else what else is realistic here? Like, what do they need? What else can they go out and get that you think like it's not going to be splashy? You're not
Yeah.
going to love the name, but boy, is this going to make them better with a guy like this?
So I've heard a lot of buzz with the Patriots connecting them to Leighton Vander Esch from the Dallas Cowboys as a linebacker. The Patriots are Jamie Collins, Dante Hightower, Juwan Bentley, and Kyle Van Noylis right now, right? All those guys are free agents.
Technically not here, right?
Yeah, at some point in time, you got to bring in a veteran linebacker. You're not going to just. I know everybody wants to go with the kids. I know everybody wants to get faster. Oh my God, we need speed at linebacker. Yada yada yada. I got it. But at some point, you got to bring in somebody that has some NFL experience, that's played in the league a little bit at that inside linebacker position. As fun as it might be to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, well we drafted the Leo Chenal in the second round, and he's going to be this absolute beast," right? We don't know that yet, and I think a guy like Vander Esch really fits their mold. 6'4", 255 pounds. Somebody that I said I've been hearing the Patriots have interest in or have shown interest in. He's had injury issues. He has injury concerns for the future, but I don't think it's going to break the bank for them. And as somebody in that, we just talked about it, a first round pick for Dallas a couple years ago in 2018. The Patriots had him on a short list, had some interest there for the Patriots in 2018. They ended up going Isaiah Wynn after Dallas took Vander Esch at 19. The Patriots had 23, so they never really had that decision to make that decision because the Cowboys took Vander Esch off the board. Checks a ton of boxes. I think he's got some upside. That's a guy that I've heard that the Patriots would like to try to get away from the Juwan Bentleys and the Dante Hightowers of the world. And Vander Esch still brings some size, but he also brings some athleticism and some really necessary untapped potential potentially in Dallas. He was playing in Dan Quinn's Seattle 3 system, which really wants a Mike linebacker in that Bobby Wagner mold that has a ton of athleticism and coverage ability. And they're asking him to play Mike in that scheme where he's got to drop into coverage and do all this sort of crazy stuff, 8, 9, 10, 11 yards past the line of scrimmage. And that's not really where he should belong. He's a downhill box player. So maybe the Patriots can put him into their system, which certainly fits a lot better than what he was doing in Dallas.
Yeah. Oh, so that would be a good one. You need that speed at linebacker. That's also an area that a lot of people have surmised is a place they could go in the draft, particularly early in the draft. One guy I wanted to circle back with who's not who's not a linebacker, but a guy you mentioned as a top of market guy is Allen Robinson.
Yes.
This is a guy who I know his name came up as a potential trade. This was a trade deadline target. You thought maybe this is an opportunity to get him out of Chicago. They kept him. They've clearly moved on there where Mooney appears to be their guy. What is it about Robinson? This is not a burner. This is more of a possession contested catch sort of guy. He's, I believe, turning 28 or 29 to start this season. Is he a top of market receiver still, or is this a depressed market? Like, how do you see his numbers lining up with someone like a Chark?
So here's the thing. Last year, Kenny Golladay came off a very similar injury issue type season with Detroit where he didn't have the best quarterback play and all that kind of stuff. And he got 4 for 72 with the New York Giants. Now, it took a little while for his market to come to fruition, and I don't think he signed until or later in the week this week, right? This week last year. It didn't come together quickly for Kenny Golladay, but eventually Golladay got his money. 4 for 72 is definitely a big contract. I would say Allen Robinson for the Patriots. I would call the Patriots dark horses. They're sort of lurking in this market. If it doesn't get too crazy, I could see them jumping in and trying to make a deal here with Allen Robinson. And the main reason is we talked about it when we were talking about MVS and Chark and those guys. They want size on the outside. They want somebody that can win in contested situations. And I think with Allen Robinson in particular, he is a fantastic route runner. He really understands how to use his craftiness or his route running IQ to get open and be shifty and be sudden at the release point and all those types of things. And he's a really next level route runner, as well as a guy that can win down the field on contested grabs. He can play inside. He can play outside. There's a lot to like about Allen Robinson with the Patriots. He's been there, done that, number one guy in the National Football League in the past. And you might not have to give him that $20 million bag, right? Because he comes off a year, last year, 400 yards, 1 touchdown, injuries, never really synced up with Justin Fields. That was somebody that didn't have a good year last year. And maybe they can maximize on the fact that the market's not going to be crazy for Allen Robinson because of that. So I think that that's certainly a possibility. I wouldn't say that they're front runners or leaders of the pack, but like I said, lurking, dark horse potential there for Allen Robinson if it doesn't get crazy.
Interesting. Yeah, again, there's that comfort in names, but I do worry again, as you said, entering that age 29, he's going to be 29 by the time the season. He's 28 now, 29 in August. It doesn't go great for receivers when they kind of start to get to around that age. So any long-term money here, I do think, is a bit of a concern.
I would say that the deal that they would probably like to emulate is something similar to what they gave to Hunter Henry last year, which was 3 for 37 and a half, right? So right around that 12, $13 million a year range on just a 3-year deal. So I don't think that they're going to give Allen Robinson a ton of term or a ton of length in the contract. I think the one big thing, though, that you have to look at from a Patriots perspective is they are going to, if they make a signing like Allen Robinson, they have to keep his year one cap hit low because they don't currently have the cap space to absorb a $15 million hit in year one. So the best way to do that is to give more years on the deal so you can space it out. So if they're going to sign a guy like Allen Robinson, it's got to be at least 3 or 4 years because there's no other way really for them to make the cap work.
So again, I guess it's going to come down to, like I say, is dollars are going to matter. But if you wanted it just in terms of style, do you prefer a possession contested catch type receiver of Allen Robinson, who's not necessarily going to stretch the field for you, versus an MVS who can run, but his catch rate over the course of his career is abysmal? And again, a lot of it being because he's been the run down field guy, and, they throw it to him and those passes just don't get completed as frequently. But again, I think he's got like a 45 or 46% catch rate over the course of his career. So I don't, I know Bill likes his sure-handed guys. Which would you rather have? The big guy on the outside who can run, or another possession type guy that's going to keep things really tight to the box?
I would rather have Allen Robinson or that type of frame, honestly, because I just think that that's where Mac Jones is going to be at his best. I just don't really feel like they're ever going to be an air it out type of offense. Like I don't think that they're ever going to want Mac Jones both stylistically in terms of the way they want to call things, but also just in terms of his skill set and what fits him the best. I don't think they're going to want him throwing 50-yard bombs to MVS down the field. I think a guy like DJ Chark is a really interesting prospect that could potentially be a better value than somebody like Nelson Aguilar, but still, I think Allen Robinson is a really, really good match for Mac Jones, somebody that can just get open, use his frame, win at the short and intermediate levels, maybe win on some verticals out of the slot, fades from the slot or seam balls or something like that. But you're not asking him to push the football 45 plus yards down the field to get it to his number one guy. And I definitely think that that's where they're at. They should, and I think that this is what they will ultimately try to do, is build their offense from the inside out. That's how they've always been best in terms of the Patriots with Tom Brady over the years, and that's where Mac Jones is really at his best, is between the numbers, short, quick, intermediate throws. I don't know. I like the idea of a MVS more than Chark because I worry about Chark's injuries. I also worry about the fact that you're probably going to have to pay Chark something substantial in the similar vein of Nelson Aguilar. MVS maybe you can get for a little bit less, and then also still have that ability to stretch the field. So I don't know. I just kind of feel like they are looking for some size, some speed on the outside that is just going to do what Nelson Aguilar did last year with a little bit more ability to win a ball down the field. But that's never going to be a huge part of their offense, is pushing the football down the field outside the numbers. So I think that that's something that I would just put, like, kind of preface it with, is if they're never going to really be a big outside the numbers team, then there's really no reason to pay an outside the numbers guy at the top of the market. Whereas somebody like Allen Robinson can just win really in the middle of the field. And that's where I think they're going to want to be.
Yeah. Yep. So if you were, give me your wish list, money aside, of reasonable guys. You're not going to go out and sign, again, Cooper's already off the board, but if you ranked them based on what you think the Patriots can get him at, what is Robinson's top of your list?
Yeah, I would say Robinson would be number one. I like the MVS potential. Two other names I would throw out there at wide receiver. I haven't heard anything about Alan Lazard's RFA tender yet, but he's another guy, 6'5", can get up the field, has some alignment versatility, can line them up kind of everywhere. I think he's somebody that would be really interesting to them if he doesn't get tendered at that second round level. If they just tender him in Green Bay at right of first refusal, or they don't tender him at all, and the Patriots don't have to give up draft pick compensation to get Alan Lazard. I've been told that they've reached out to Alan Lazard, connected with Alan Lazard, could have potential there. So Alan Lazard's another name I put there. I also just love the idea, even if it's not going to be a high volume option in your offense, having somebody like Jakeem Grant in this offense to just give it an influx of speed, I think would be really something that they could use. And not only could Jakeem Grant give some of that horizontal speed. Look, all of us say, look at what Isaiah McKenzie does for Buffalo, or look at what Deebo Samuel and those guys do in San Francisco. Why can't the Patriots get some of these horizontal field stretchers that can run like that? Jakeem Grant definitely fits that kind of mold, and then you can also throw him on the kick return game. The one guy that I really do feel like also, I think we're all kind of assuming that N'Keal Harry is going to be on the outside looking in here for the New England really soon. I would also say that Gunner is kind of trending in that direction as well, where they just can't keep carrying. They tried it. They developed. They tried to see if he could develop into the next Welker, the next Edelman, the next Amendola. He's not going to be a wide receiver in the league, at least not for the Patriots, right? He's not going to be he's going to be a returner only. So somebody like Jakeem Grant that can play offense and return, or even somebody like bringing back Braxton Berrios, who, by the way, I should mention, is a Drew Rosenhaus client. And that's somebody that I do think that they have a really good relationship with. Braxton Berrios, Jakeem Grant, those types of players can take over on returns for Gunner, and they can also play a little bit more on offense than Gunner can.
Berrios is exactly the guy I was going to bring up here. We missed on that one. We thought Gunner would be that guy, not Berrios, so you let him go, and you actually saw him start to do some of the things you were hoping you'd be able to develop Gunner. And again, this is why, even though we're going to promote the hell out of our training camp coverage, why you should almost never believe anything anybody says at training camp.
Me and Alex joke about this all the time, because I told Alex at training camp in 2019 when Gunner came onto the scene. We got into a huge fight on camera because I sat there and I said that Gunner was not an NFL receiver, not an NFL player at wide receiver. And Alex always rags on me because he made an all-pro team as a returner. And I'm like, yeah, as a returner. Like I said, you can pull up the tape. I said he wasn't an NFL receiver. It just, to me, I never saw the receiving ability with Gunner. I never thought that it was going to translate. I never thought it was going to develop there. And they gave him as much time as they could. There's still no news yet on whether they tendered him or not on the RFA side of things. But after they didn't tender Jakob Johnson yesterday at all, I just find it hard to believe that they're going to throw a tender on Gunner Olszewski. So I think Gunner is... I think they would like to move on and upgrade Gunner to somebody, like I said, that could potentially contribute on offense as well, whether that's a Grant, like a speed gadget player like that, or somebody like a Braxton Berrios who fits their mold of that short, underneath, shifty slot receiver with the return ability.
Yeah, and it's again, I know you were not on that bandwagon. There were quite a few people that were
Yeah.
gushing over the receiver ability at camp and that he really could be that guy. And again, no one's trying to bag on anybody here. Gunnar Olszewski does a lot of things well. This is not something, at least here with this team, he's shown he's able to do, and it's something that this team wants. Someone to be able to jump into this role, and I mean, how to get a little bit of yak to operate underneath, to run those types of pivot routes that those guys had been doing for years, and give those option routes, and create a little bit after the catch. The Patriots are about as bad as any team I've ever seen in terms of yak. You have possession guys who get the ball and go down, even to the point that they talk about it like a Jacoby Myers. Like, I just want to secure the ball, man. I'm not really looking to run, and they need some guys who can run a little bit with it, especially if they're going to be throwing shorter passes. Wanted to mention something in a minute. You talked about Jakob Johnson, but first off, again, continuing with the breaking news, as the NFL tampering window, we've now reached hour one. It's 1:01. We've been live since noon when the window opened. The Steelers signing Mitch Trubisky to a 2-year deal. I don't know what's sadder, this or the fact that somewhere there are some Giants fans that are bummed out about this.
Yeah, look, Mitchell Trubisky had a market. Like,
he did.
For what it is, Mitchell Trubisky had a market. I think in a lot of ways that tells you what the league, and we've been saying it on the pod for 6 months now about this quarterback class, how much of a disaster this quarterback class is in terms of first round, top of the market.
First round talent, nothing.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, Malik Willis is a complete project. Great tools, but a complete project. And I think a lot of teams are going to get caught in that Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen world where they think that Mitchell Trubisky, Malik Willis is that next guy. He's not, right? I don't think he will be. And you look at Mitchell Trubisky, he had a market there. This was a lot of chatter about him having options in free agency as somebody that could potentially be pushing for a starting job next year. Now in Pittsburgh, I think he might win that job in Pittsburgh. They'll probably end up drafting somebody. If the Trubisky mold is what they're going for, then maybe somebody like a Sam Howell or a Desmond Ryder catches their attention in the draft. That's kind of fits those boxes a little bit for Pittsburgh. But yeah, it's weird when Mitchell Trubisky has a back market, and what are we doing?
It goes back to what we talked about before. It's that draft pedigree, people at the and I always use that Arrested Development gift there with the David Cross's character saying like, but it might work for us. There's so many guys. You see this, every quarterback drafted really high with maybe I'm thinking over time, Dwayne Haskins might be the only guy I can think of that didn't get a second sniff after being drafted in the first round. But these guys, doesn't matter how bad they flame out. Josh Rosen, even disastrously flaming out within a year, are getting a second look and sometimes a third look because you're looking at the potential and you're going to convince yourself, yes, I can make this work for us. Again, the legal tampering window is an hour old. Nothing yet from the Patriots. They have not lost anyone. They have not gained anyone. So at this point, it's a win. Evan did mention, again, we'll wrap up in a little bit here. We wanted to hang on just to see if there were any fireworks. What I will ensure you is that if there is something big, we're going to jump something huge, we might jump back up live and talk to you about it. But smaller stuff throughout the day. Evan will be reporting on it both on clnsmedia.com and on our YouTube channel, Patriots Press Pass. So make sure you check that out for all of the latest updates and the latest news. Evan's going to be on it these next few days. As is always funny, the tampering window opens on Monday and then free agency opens on Wednesday. But it's actually like the close of free agency because by that point, a lot of the good deals are out there. You mentioned Jakob Johnson not getting tendered.
Yeah.
And then there was a question. It seems like an insignificant move because it's not a high-profile player you're super worried about keeping, and you view them as replaceable, where if you wanted to get another person in that mold, you can probably find them fairly cheaply. I will ask you, however, is there any chance that this might be more of a philosophical shift for the Patriots? I know they're a team that runs a lot of 21 personnel, and it's not necessarily fashionable anymore to do so. And teams that want to see them throw more and open it up, when they come out there with Jakob Johnson in the backfield, you're like, your shoulders slump and you're like, okay, I know what's coming here.
Right.
So again, it's worked for them. Bully ball has worked for them. They won a Super Bowl on the strength of defense and a running game down the stretch there in 2018. They did it with Cam Newton because that's all that worked. And really there wasn't going to be something else, but you went and you got your shiny new toy in Mac Jones, and you played it conservative, and you kind of, still did the things that you were doing before. Is there a chance philosophically you think the Patriots might be moving in a different direction?
I think there is. That they've teetered with it in the last couple of years. I think a guy that we talked about a lot in 2020, just because there was nothing else to talk about with that free agency period for the Patriots, was Dan Vitale, who definitely had some more receiving ability from the fullback position,
from
the Devlins or the Johnsons of the world. You also look at a player like Jonnu Smith, who I think last year in a lot of ways kind of proved that maybe that traditional inline tight end role was not something that he was going to be super highly productive in. But maybe using him more out of the backfield, or kind of like an H-back, if you will, as a flanker, that could be something that they could look into more in the future as a way to get Jonnu and Hunter Henry on the field more together, instead of lining them both up on the line of scrimmage or having to detach one of them when they're really not detached players. Maybe you have Jonnu working a little bit more out of the backfield. There have been some tea leaves over the last couple of years, I would say, that the Patriots would like to be a little bit more, have the fullback position be a little bit more of a receiving threat out of the backfield, and not just have him be that lead blocker. I think obviously the model has always been a guy like Juszczyk in San Francisco, and I think Jonnu might actually fit that kind of role a little bit better than he fits the Patriots to traditional tight end role that we saw them try to put him in last year. So yeah, I do think that there could be some philosophical changes, but I would also mention that the tender, even the right of first refusal tender, which is the lowest level you can tender a player at, I think is around $2 million. And Jakob Johnson's probably going to make even less than that on a contract. So this is also more of a financial thing, I think, too, with Jakob, where they were going to, just by tendering him, they were going to be paying him double what they probably would have to pay him if they don't. There's not a whole lot of teams that are going to be knocking down the door for fullbacks in general. If you want a fullback on your roster, you probably have already rostered a fullback. I think the one team that you can look at that maybe the Patriots could lose Jakob Johnson to is Josh McDaniels out in Vegas. They did not tender their fullback either, Alex Ingold. He's now a free agent. So maybe there is a possibility, I guess, that Josh could come and take Jakob Johnson, but I don't think the Patriots would lose much sleep over Jakob Johnson. I think great story, great teammate, great locker room guy, filled his role, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I could definitely see them try to be a little bit more dangerous at that fullback spot if they're going to be so power eye, strong eye heavy, and they're going to have the two back system in the backfield. Then it would behoove them a little bit to be, a little bit more dynamic at that fullback spot.
Yep. So we'll see there. I guess I don't even know if you mentioned him during that entire thing, but Dalton Keene is on the roster, correct?
Yeah, he's on the roster. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. That one has just been
obviously a disaster from the start, but this is who you. I mean, I know what you described in Vitale or some of the other guys who are a little bit more, versatile and are not that traditional frigging, neck roll fullback that's just, pounding the, but he's there. He exists. He's a person, who that's the role you envisioned in him at this point. Is this a complete bust?
I would say so. I mean, until we have not seen anything, not even a training camp practice where I can sit here and say, Dalton Keene flashed, or Dalton Keene had a nice catch, or Dalton Keene made a nice play. There is just nothing of any sort that I can point to and say, Dalton Keene looked decent here, or he had a nice OTA practice there. Not even anything. Devin Asiasi has popped way, way more in summer practices and things like that than Dalton Keene ever has. So, man, yeah, that one, you especially look at the fact that what the Patriots actually gave up to get the Dalton Keene pick was pretty substantial. They gave up a couple of picks to move back up to draft Dalton Keene. So they really like the player out of college. I don't think the team has completely given up on him yet, just yet. But yeah, I wouldn't be any sort of have any sort of expectations whatsoever.
I don't want to turn this. I don't want to go off the rails here because we will wrap it up. We're here to talk about news and kind of get you through this first hour where typically there's a lot of business here. This is particularly frustrating in terms of if you're, if you follow the Patriots closely or if you're a Patriots fan, I understand people's frustration with how incredibly wrong they have been almost instantly with people who they really, really, and by people, I say, when I say they, I mean Bill, really, really, really liked for whatever reason. And that includes the two tight ends they took in terms of Asiasi and Keene, as you said, moving up for Keene and having them almost instantly clearly not be able to play at this level, not showing at all. I mean, Asiasi maybe flashed once or twice or showed a thing, but nothing that would lead you to believe that they had any chance of being a special player, just maybe that they could contribute a little. They go out after drafting two tight ends and sign two other tight ends, and one of them, you would imagine there would have been a clearly defined role of how they're going to use Jonnu Smith, and there wasn't, and that's as bad as it gets. And then you have the same exact situation with Aguilar. To be so certain, and I'm not even going to mention Harry at this point, overruling the entire room in terms of which the best receiver prospect was, and watching game-changing talent go to 4, 5, 6 different teams that you could have had yourself if you chose to. So great. But to be so spectacularly wrong so quickly and to know it in less than a year with all of these guys is what worries me the most. You're going to have swings and misses, but to love these guys and aggressively pursue them and then just realize a year later, like, man, I wish we weren't stuck with these guys anymore, is what is kind of hard to fathom with the Pats and hard to swallow if you're a Patriots fan, because they're not going to spend a lot of money now because they spent a lot of money on stuff that didn't necessarily work out.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that you look at, and we've talked about this a lot on Pat Speed, is that in order for me to like get behind a signing with the Patriots, I need to see this player is going to play this role in the existing offensive scheme. I think the issues that they've had with acquiring offensive talent in particular is that they have, like, they draft N'Keal Harry, right, in the first round, and they sit there and they say, oh, this is our guy. What is N'Keal Harry's route tree? Like, what is his role? Who can we look at from past Patriots teams over this 20-year span and say N'Keal Harry plays like that guy? If we put him in that role, he will be successful in this offense. There isn't a comp. Like, there isn't a comp for a 6'3", mid 4.5s guy that wins contested catches down the field, being this big time playmaker for the Patriots, because they haven't had that guy and it hasn't worked out when they had tried to go after that guy. I would say the same thing about somebody like Dalton Keene or Jonnu Smith, who are probably best used as these like Swiss Army knife, versatile type of players. Who is the comp? Like, who have they had in the past? I know everybody went with Jonnu, went to somebody like Hernandez, but Hernandez was a different animal. Like,
it's not even close.
Talent. Right. Quickness, explosiveness, all those types of things. Just a much different level of player than somebody like Jonnu. So if I'm looking at the Patriots now and I say, okay, like, who do I want in free agency? Who do I want in the draft on offense? I want guys that I can say, if they draft Sky Moore, I know that Sky Moore can come into this offense. You drop him into Julian Edelman's route tree, and he's going to be a good player in that role. If I want Chris Olave, I'm going to look at guys like Brandon Lloyd or Brandon LaFell or some of these, David Patton, even if you want to go back a little bit, and look at some of those outside receivers and say, that's who he is.
But let me ask you, because that makes sense. However, though, isn't there a thinking that they need to evolve, and therefore, in order to do that, you need players different than ones that have worked for you in previous systems? Because that's part of the thinking there too.
They're not going to evolve. I know we all talk about evolve. They are not going to evolve. Like, this is their system. This is what they do. The reason why they didn't go outside the building and hire an offensive coordinator with some clout is because Bill Belichick doesn't want to change the playbook. So he's just going to promote from within, have Nick Caley take over the play calling, and then that's going to be, they're just going to run the Josh McDaniels offense with Nick Caley calling the plays. And I think the biggest reason why, from a Patriots point of view, that something like Bill O'Brien didn't happen was because even though Bill O'Brien's offense at Alabama has a ton of Patriots roots, has a ton of Patriots things in it, Bill O'Brien comes in and Bill O'Brien runs his stuff his way, right? They're not going to change. And that's just really ultimately what it is. And it's frustrating in a lot of ways, right? But the system is what the system is. And at this point, that's why I'm really high on a guy like Robinson, right? Because I think Allen Robinson, you can look at possession receivers in that ilk that have succeeded with the Patriots and think that you can do the same things with the guy like Allen Robinson. If they went out and spent money on, they swapped Nelson Aguilar for Robbie Anderson, I would say why? Like that's all you're going to get 500 yards out of Robbie Anderson next year, right? Like just like they did with Nelson Aguilar. So get a guy that I can say runs the X like this, runs the Z like this, runs the Y roll like that, and then be able to put it into that system. You got to find system fits. And I think that's where when they've gone outside that realm, like N'Keal Harry, that's why you end up with a bust. Because who is N'Keal Harry? In the last 20 years for the Patriots, who is N'Keal Harry? And where has that success ever come from? It hasn't.
I mean, it's not. I think they just thought he was going to be a different type of player. I really do think, again, I remember that Arizona State tape, and you saw a couple times where he's catching it and reversing the field on people. And yeah, I think they thought game speed was going to be faster than whatever they, saw in drills. And I think they thought he was going to be a yak guy and a guy who'd be that kind of big slot who also could contest catches on the outside because of his physical profile. And he ended up being none of those things. He could not. They tried to back shoulder him to death and he just couldn't do it. They tried, contested catches. He wasn't making them. They tried getting him downfield and he wasn't playing big. They tried him in the red zone. He couldn't, and he couldn't get anything going underneath. One is just his hands aren't good enough, but he couldn't get off the line. So he couldn't do any of the things they thought he could do. I think it was just, I think it's less about, did he compare to anybody they had? I think it was, he literally he was bad at all of it. He's bad at all of it.
Yeah. But you look at like last year in free agency when they signed a guy like Kendrick Bourne, we were all pretty jazzed up about that signing because Kendrick Bourne is the exact kind of receiver that we've seen succeed here with the Patriots in the past, right? Yeah. The guy that's tough, knows how to run routes, a good team guy, knows his kind of role and framework and the big sense of the puzzle and does all those types of things. And that's kind of what has always succeeded here. And that's what I think the Patriots need to get back to. And it's not necessarily that they have to make every signing be at the Kendrick Bourne level. Like they can go up a ring or two, but if they're going to spend money on a big time receiver, then you better hope that it's a system fit. Like that's why I just don't like Amari Cooper, Robbie Anderson, these finesse receivers like that. Like don't do that because that's just going to be a waste of money for you. Go get your guy that is going to make sense for the way. That it makes sense for the Patriots and in the chat, N'Keal Harry, great blocker. Yeah, really. Like that's really.
I mean, we've done this before. You don't spend a first round. Again, this is one of my top 10 least favorite Twitter sports debates over the last 10 years is the people who think because they point out that N'Keal Harry can block that they're somehow educating the rest of us about how football is more than just running routes and catching. Everybody knows N'Keal Harry can block. You don't spend a first-round draft pick on a receiver whose primary skill is blocking. They thought they were bringing in a game-changing talent. They didn't get it. It's nice that he can block. He's useless as a receiver.
In 2019, I actually asked Bill Belichick about N'Keal Harry's ability to block. And he's actually came out and told me at the time, I have to go back and pull the quote, that you don't draft you don't like
Right.
receive, like that's not that. It's nice. It's like a comp. Can
It's
bill himself,
nice.
like it's nice that he can block, but that's not really why he's here, right? Like that, like the linemen block, the wide receivers block
Yeah.
too, but it's not really.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the offensive line though.
My Lamborghini's not too bad in the snow. Like you didn't buy it for the snow. It just, it actually handles all right. No, you bought it for a different reason. Real quick, I'm sorry. Did you say you wanted to talk about something?
Yeah, I want to talk about the offensive line.
Real quick, let me throw this up there because it's out there and people are talking about it in the chat. Everyone likes receivers, including defenders on the Patriots. Matthew Judon out here recruiting. He's out here recruiting in the legal tampering window, tweeting at Allen Robinson, hey, what are you doing? So it is interesting that you've got usually defensive guys tend to like defense. You got Judon over here on the defensive side thinking like, yeah, we could definitely use a little bit of help on offense.
Yeah, not to like get too crazy about Judon going out there and recruiting, but if anybody on the Patriots has some clout, especially after the year that he had last year to go out there and try to recruit some guys, it's probably Matthew Judon, right? I mean, he's the one star on the team now with J.C. Jackson gone, with Pro Bowl level talent that was probably brushing shoulders with some of these guys at the Pro Bowl, at these big NFL events and things like that. Not the worst guy to have recruiting for you, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think you went at Bobby Wagner also.
Love it.
So yeah. Anyway, go ahead. You wanted to talk a little bit about offensive line again, and we are going to wrap in a little bit here. But yeah, go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, so Patriots have two big key free agents on the offensive line, Ted Karras, and obviously a literally big one, and Trent Brown. And they are returning 4 starters on the offensive line when you factor in Michael Onwenu, right? So there's really only one spot that they absolutely need to fill. But I was told last night that the gap between them and Ted Karras is pretty wide. Like to the point where they don't really think that they're going to retain Ted Karras at this point. So this is now 2.
Is that why you think the Ferentz signing?
It could be potentially connected. I think this is now 2 years, 2 times in a row, though, because Ted Karras, a free agent a couple years ago, went to Miami, left New England. That the Patriots just haven't been willing to really go there with a guy like Ted Karras, which actually is, I think, a little surprising to me, honestly, because he isn't going to break the bank, and he's a really good
plug and play.
Like a really solid locker room type of guy as well, and it fits what their whole culture.
And he's a nice guy, and he's a friend of CLNS Media because Evan Lazar did an interview with him last season, heading into the season. He's a good guy, yeah.
And right now they're pretty far apart from what I'm told with Ted Karras, so that's another thing to look for, because there was an argument there, and I think it's really true that you can have, let's say, Michael Onwenu play right tackle and then put Ted Karras at guard, and it's a cheaper avenue than having to pay Trent Brown to play tackle.
I still wonder, Trent Brown has only played well here, and he's been paid to play poorly everywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm curious what that market is for Brown. The Patriots have clearly gotten the best out of him in his career, and I do think it happened the first time. I don't know what's going to happen here with that.
And I do think that some free agents, and I don't think that anybody is going to burn any bridges, but I do think some free agents, especially guys that the Patriots have talked to of their own free agents, are a little bit taken aback by the fact that the Patriots, and I think it was Mike Giardi who kind of phrased it this way first, the Patriots are sort of operating like they used to when Brady was here, right? Where it's like, we're the best thing you got, like we're the best option for you, so we're going to come in under market, right? We're not going to give you what you could get out there, but we're the New England Patriots, and you're coming here to compete, and you're coming here to win, and that's our allure. They don't have that card to play as much anymore, right? I still think it's Bill.
They paid at or over market on most of their signings last year, though.
Right. So last year, I think, is a complete anomaly. And this year, they have sort of gone back to being under market. Like, look at JC Jackson, right? Like, JC Jackson, there was absolutely no way that his agent Neil Schwartz was going to tell JC Jackson to take 3 for 51. Like, there's just no way that he was going to ever come close to taking that deal. So you look at some of these things, you look at, the Patriots, I've been told to come on under market on JC. They've come in under market on Ted Karras. They have come in under market on a lot of these guys. And some of them, I think that a lot of Patriots fans are going to sit there and say, oh, I'm cool with them letting Bentley walk, or I'm cool with them letting Hightower retire or walk or whatever. All that can be fine and dandy, but some of these guys would be nice to retain. They don't have a ton of money to add guys externally anyways. So to just go out there and make some moves and bring back some people probably would have been a nice thing to do. And at least two guys that I know of, and probably more, have come in under market value. Like, Ted Karras is not somebody that's going to demand $10 million a year on the open market. So the fact that they came in to a point where my source told me that they're not even close to being in an agreement, it tells me that, that had to have been pennies, right?
Well, again,
that offer had to have been so low.
But there's two ways you can look at it, right? If you're the Patriots, and again, yes, coming in way under is basically not making an offer at all, which really tells you that their thinking is, I'm not actually super interested in this player. I'd rather use that money somewhere else. And that's kind of where they're at. So what you may be worth is not something I'm willing to pay. So what they end up offering doesn't actually matter in that case. They're clearly just ready to move on from Ted Karras at whatever price tag they think he's going to get. And again, that's how they do it. It's, if you can get this, mazel tov. If you can't, we're here, and that's it.
Right.
That's how they do it. And and it's because they spent as much as they spent last year, and that's where they're at with it. I don't want to wrap before we at least address one of the major things that happened, capping a really insane week of quarterback news, which was Tom Brady returning. Now, Evan and we popped up here. I remember, and it's actually probably the funny part about it is, in the history of CLNS media, our most watched live broadcast here on the Patriots channel. And again, if you're watching, please subscribe to our Patriots YouTube channel. We do go live a lot. If you're new to this and you're just jumping on, Evan, one of the best football reporters in the market, covers the Patriots down at Gillette Stadium, travels with the team, training camp, draft coverage, everything, you name it. Lots of live stuff multiple times a week with his partner in crime, Alex Barth, who works over at 98.5 Live Patriots Beat podcast. We also have Greg Bedard on here doing a lot of his stuff with his Greg Bedard Patriots podcast. So you get real insider stuff here, and a lot of it. So again, subscribe to our channel. But you and I jump on here and we go, Brady retired. And then while that's happening, is all of that, no, he's not retiring, pushback, which you and I knew was nonsense. But it was what it was, and we talked about it. And I think at the time you mentioned it was a bummer in a couple of ways. A bummer that he was going to be remembered for the botched retirement. Then he was going to be remembered for not thanking the Patriots on the way out. And like everything about Tom Brady's exit was clumsy. From the leaked news to him forgetting to include or choosing not to include the Patriots, realizing how dumb it was, trying to cover his tracks by retweeting and quote tweeting things that were sent about him. But he didn't get the send-off the greatest player who's almost ever played a organized team sport should have gotten, because it was so goofy. And the specter of him possibly returning, which has existed since day one, which was pretty wishy-washy about how he's phrased it. Then he goes on his little, Jim Gray infomercial and says, never say never. And immediately. So this was 40 days. This was essentially a period of Lent. Tom Brady gave up football for Lent and then decided to come back, and that's it. He's back. I wouldn't be stunned if he plays like 3 more years at this point.
So the only thing that Tom Brady is bad at is retiring.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this has been an absolute mess. And I know that Tom Brady ultimately doesn't care that it's been a mess, but at some point in time, if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in particular, don't you just have to say, like, we're not going to keep doing this with you, Tom? Like, eventually, he's the greatest. Tom Brady deserves all the bouquets and all the nice things that we all say about him. But at some point in time, if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you're going to have to sit there and say, we need a long-term plan at quarterback. And if you're going to just keep pulling a Brett Favre and you're going to retire, then unretire and retire and unretire and retire and unretire, like we can't be in that market anymore. And I think from a lot of angles for me, this has become frustrating. Like this has become annoying at this point because Brady has his spots have changed. Like he's now kind of this different character. And I understand that Adam Schefter and Jeff Darlington and ESPN jumping the gun that weekend on the retirement announcement made him feel some external pressure. That's what Brady Sr.'s spin has been the last 24 hours, is that the sourcing and the information that came out about him retiring was what ultimately forced him to put something out there and some sort of decision out there. And it was botched and it was badly handled. And if all he needed was these 40 days to come to a final conclusion and come to a final decision, then he should have just taken the 40 days. Like, let Schefters and the Rappaports of the world continue the news cycle and continue to get their clicks by speculation and all that kind of stuff. And I get you don't want to be in this circus of a distraction and all these things. You don't want helicopters following you like they used to do with Brett Favre and all that kind of stuff. But this almost looks worse. Like to retire and then unretire 40 days later. And from everything that you hear about it too, he never actually retired. Like he was still working out. He was still on the TB12 method. Like he was still doing everything. And then he goes to that soccer game over the weekend with Ronaldo and kind of spills the beans with his facial expressions with Ronaldo that he's coming back. And then the next day he has to announce it. So he did it again in a lot of ways, right? Yeah. And I don't know. I think ultimately what ended up happening was, as we have known for a very, very long time, his family wants him to retire. Like him and everybody that is in the Brady camp, but mostly Giselle and the family wants Brady to retire. But like a lot of people, when you live and breathe and sweat and everything, one thing, like when you retire tomorrow, you're kind of just like, oh, well, what do I do with myself? Like, well, I'm bored. Like, this is boring. Like, I got no drive. I got nothing to look forward to. But yeah, oh man, I mean, what a ridiculous situation.
And that's the thing is, I don't, what's funny is like a lot of people will say, there was speculation. Oh, it's a power play. He wants Tampa to do a certain thing. Oh, he wants to get it to free agency, announce he's coming back after Tampa spends money and can no longer afford him. Then they have to force a trade and he can go to his preferred destination. I never thought it was anything nefarious like that. I think the contract with the family was that, after this one, probably good to walk, right? And it was like, yep, that's what we're going to do. And he did it and then sat around the house and was a total miserable prick and thought like, this is the worst thing ever. And eventually it was like, just freaking play already, So that's it. I think he thought at the time he was good with it and realized almost immediately after, I'm totally not good with this. And probably, it gun to his head. If you asked him 3 days later, are you coming back? He would have been like, yep, I am. But he took this long to be 1,000% sure he was, and he would be, and the family would be okay, and it would make it work. But I just think he changed his mind. And we get it. Like, there's two ways to look at this. There's one, which is you play this incredibly violent sport and you're playing with house money, and every single day that you get to have your parts and your limbs and your brain intact is a good day. And you say, let's not risk another one. And you've gotten to the age of 43 and everything is where it's supposed to be, and you feel okay and that you can live a healthy life in the rest of your life, then maybe be thankful and move on. Brady's not in that headspace. He's still playing at or near the top of his game. You and I talked about this during the retirement. Physically, he looks better than he did 5 years ago. Better, not the same.
It never made any sense. It never made any sense.
Nothing makes sense about it. He's playing at an insanely high, and his processing speed looks to be the same. He's getting rid of the ball at the same pace and speed he was before. His arm looks strong. There is nothing about Tom Brady that would lead you to believe he can't go back out there and throw for another 5,000 yards this year and get the Bucs, knocking on the door of a Super Bowl. So it made no sense beyond we've made it this far. I really am ready to move on with my family and this and that. If you're not, then there's no reason to retire. He clearly was not.
Yeah, and
I'm glad. I don't want him to die. I don't want him to get decapitated. But I'm glad. It's weird to live in a world where Tom Brady's not playing football. And also, my biggest lament was the grand experiment. I want to see how long you can do it for. This is changing, like, and the way you view everything about aging and athletes in this sport and the limits of the human ability. I want Tom Brady to look like he's 25 years old playing quarterback when he's 55 years old and still doing this. It would be unbelievable.
I'm on the other side of this argument. I'm sorry. Like, I was happy. I was relieved.
I want to see it forever.
I was relieved when he retired because I think the biggest reason why is we talk about, like, remember when Kyrie Irving said that, like, Boston looks like the ex-girlfriend or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, no, that's with Tom Brady. Like, we look like the ex-girlfriend with Tom Brady. We don't look that way with Kyrie. Like, nobody gives a crap about you, Kyrie. But with Tom Brady, like, I was at the Celtics game yesterday, KG's number retirement. It was awesome. Great ceremony. We're on the way walking out, and people are, like, talking. You could hear it, the buzz about Brady, on retiring. Like, that was what the conversation was walking out of the stadium in Boston. And I've had enough of it. Like, I just want to move on. I want to bury this chapter of Patriots history. I want to do all of the ceremonies and all the statues and all the number retirings and the Patriots Hall of Fame and that entire thing. And we'll cover it and it will be great. And I want to do all that. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of Tom Brady playing and then playing but not playing and playing and not play, like, I am not here for it. Like,
you can do that all when you're an old man, Evan. Okay, Tom Brady has more to offer, and I'm sorry, your plans on how you're going to cover Tom Brady's post career are going to wait.
I don't want Patriots press pass and Patriots beat to have to keep on talking about another team's quarterback. Like,
that's reason enough. Let's tell Tom, and I'm sure he'll change his mind.
You're right. I'll call up Don Yee and I'll say, listen, Don, like, can we just not do this? Like, I just look in great for him. Like, sure, like, go out there, win another MVP. At this rate, I probably will retire before Tom Brady does. And whatever. I just ultimately, I think a part of me, and this is the fan of me, I will admit, it does still sting to watch him play for another team, right? Like, it does still sting. And when he said he was retiring, I was like, oh, this is finally over. Like, we can just go and we can move on from this. We don't have to watch Tom Brady play in Tampa Bay anymore. We don't have to go on and hear and turn on 98.5 and it's Bill versus Brady in the middle of October for, like, no good reason whatsoever. Like, they're not playing each other. It's got nothing to do with anything, but we just still got to talk about it. I'm just ready to move on. That's all.
Yeah, no, I get it. Like I said, to me, I just enjoy a world in which Tom Brady is still a quarterback. It gives you something to watch, gives you something to marvel at. It's a story. I love that Aaron Rodgers is sitting there right now, like, damn it, which is great. So I enjoy all of that, and I think it's great. Couple things before we wrap it here. I do want to let everybody know that here in the chat, we love having you in here. We love the discourse and you guys going at it, and everybody here is obviously extremely passionate. Please try to keep it civil. A couple of people have been put on timeout because I don't want you insulting one another. So please don't do that. Just talk sports. We're just here. It's not a serious thing we're talking about. We're BSing about things. Please don't insult people and don't elevate it and make it personal. Let's just hang out and chat here. It's fun. We enjoy it. We enjoy having you here. It makes it lively. We're always keeping an eye on what the commenters are saying. It is interesting. And so just wanted to kind of give that out here. We want everybody to be able to enjoy themselves too. So try to not get so mad that you're insulting one another. Anyway, beyond that, as we said, tampering period began at noon we'll be here all day. Evan's going to be working it. He's got his sources. He's hearing things. Patriots are involved in stuff. JC Jackson's probably not part of that. We'll see how that thing goes. We are hour and 40 minutes into it. JC Jackson has not gone anywhere. Just reminding everybody again, subscribe to our channel for exclusive Patriots video content, youtube.com/Patriots Press Pass, or just head over to YouTube and subscribe. If you're watching now, wherever you're watching us on the Patriots channel, our main channel, hit some likes, hit some subscribes. It really helps us out. It allows us to continue to bring this content to you free and as often as we possibly can. So definitely hang in with us here.
Add one more thing before we wrap up here.
Yeah, please.
I just got a text from an agent that told me that the reason why we haven't seen a lot of fireworks yet is that the league is trying to give the impression like these negotiations actually started at noon, right? Yeah. So these things are coming to a little bit slower this year because I think in years past, people have looked at it and said, oh my God, like 12:01, Adam Schefter's got 10 deals to report already. Like this is obviously going on well before the legal tampering period begins. So I think this lull before the storm is actually planned and designed as sort of like a moratorium. Like we're not going to announce any deals until 2 o'clock or announce any deals until 3 o'clock or something like that. So they're coming, obviously. They're coming. But yeah, I think this little bit of delay and the fact that this didn't just go crazy right at noon, it points to the fact the league is trying at least to make this look legit as best as they can.
Trying. And again, you've seen it happen. I mean, I know every time these big money deals that are very complex multi-year deals all get announced, bing, 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 bing. It does look bad, but also it just raises the possibility that you could get investigated. While everyone is doing it, if somebody does it stupidly or clumsily, that opens you up for stuff. So I get wanting to really kind of slow roll it. You've seen that happen in the NBA. Yeah. Recently. And the league is starting to look at stuff, which is like, guys, this is a bag job. So again, I get that. It's slower than it's been. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see how it heats up. Everyone's saying Chark. Did Chark happen?
Chark has not happened yet. Honestly, I love the idea of DJ Chark. I haven't actually heard. Okay. So we do have one thing to report
later.
No, Ted Karras is signing with the Cincinnati Bengals.
They're going for it.
3-year deal.
Yeah. We also have Field Yates says that Slater's coming back. So rest assured, Evan, you can put him on your list of top 10 most important Patriots, and then I can roll my eyes to the back of my head and get really mad about it when we're talking about Matthew Slater, and that's all fine. That's just how it's going to go. But that's another piece of news here. So Karras gone, Slater back.
Yes, Ted Karras, 3 years, $18 million with the Cincinnati Bengals. So that's some substantial money. And now you can kind of see why I said earlier that the Patriots and Ted Karras were extremely far apart in any sort of deal. 3 years, $18 million is nothing to sniff at for Ted Karras, and the Bengals clearly trying to solidify that offensive line, right? Alex Kappa's a signing for them earlier today, and now we got Ted Karras here today or this hour. So really trying to make some significant headway there. But yeah, Ted Karras way too far away from a Patriots perspective, and this is second time in a row kind of that the Patriots have come in way under Ted Karras's market.
Yep, it is. And, and again, when they signed him last year, the presumption was that David Andrews would leave. So yeah. I understand it also. I believe if they thought Andrews was coming back, they probably don't sign Karras last year. So them letting him go this year makes sense. I think he was plugging a hole they thought they were going to have to plug because they didn't expect Andrews to come back. He did. He's returning again this year. So I understand this from their perspective, but valuable guy, 2 stints with the Patriots, plug and play, fills a lot of injuries, can play center, can play guard there, reliable. Bengals clearly at this point, this is their second offensive lineman. They obviously recognized what their need and their greatest need was, and they're addressing it here early in free agency. Patriots, again, no big splashes, but we will cover it if there are. So again, subscribe to our YouTube YouTube channel. Follow Evan Lazar on Twitter for up-to-the-minute updates. Follow us at CLNS Media as we keep track of all the free agent news. And as I said, we may pop up here if there's anything big to talk about. Otherwise, you guys got a Patriots beat coming up later today?
Yeah, we'll do one this afternoon, probably around 5 or 6 o'clock.
So live no matter what, with a recap of the day around 5 or 6 o'clock, but I keep it here just in case any other breaking news. Other than that, thank you guys for hanging out with us here on a Monday afternoon. John Zannis, Evan Lazar, this is CLNS Media. We'll see you guys later.